Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you thought your life was over, only to have it flipped upside down in the most unexpected way? This is the story of Dr. James Carter, a successful billionaire doctor who had it all. Or so he thought. Until one day, his life collided with a woman from his past. A woman who had broken his heart long ago. A woman who now needed him more than ever. Dr. James Carter was a name known in every corner of the city. His medical foundation was a testament to his success, and his wealth was enough to make anyone envy his life. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, he felt lonely. Despite all the achievements, there was a void in his life, a void that not even the finest hospitals or the brightest boardrooms could fill. He had everything, but nothing that mattered. His heart had been closed off for years, since the day he had been betrayed by a woman he once thought he would spend forever with. That woman was Olivia Hayes. Years ago, she had walked away from him, leaving him in the depths of heartache. They had met in college, their connection instant and undeniable. She was his everything, the woman he dreamed of marrying, the one he trusted with his heart. But Olivia left, and with her, she took every ounce of trust James had left to give. He never understood why she left, and for years, he buried the pain deep inside, focusing on his work, his career, and the future. But deep down, he had never stopped wondering what could have been. Now, years later, fate had brought Olivia back into his life, but not in the way he expected. It started with an emergency call. Olivia had been in a car accident. James was the best surgeon in town, and when the call came, he knew there was no one better suited to save her life. The last thing he expected was to see her again, especially not like this. As James walked into the emergency room, his heart stopped for a brief second when he saw her lying there, unconscious, hooked up to machines. She looked fragile, vulnerable, and so different from the confident woman he had once known. The memories flooded back, of their late-night talks, their shared dreams, and their love that once felt so real. Seeing her like this was a punch to his gut, but there was no time for hesitation. He was a professional. He had to save her. As the surgery began, James worked with the precision and calm that had defined his career. Yet, despite his professional demeanor, his mind couldn't help but drift back to those days when Olivia had been his world. Was this fate's way of giving him a second chance? Or was it just another cruel reminder of a past he had tried so hard to forget? The thoughts swirled, but he pushed them aside. He had a job to do. After hours in the operating room, Olivia finally stabilized. James let out a deep breath, his hands still shaking slightly as he removed his surgical gloves. He had saved her life, but he knew the hardest part was yet to come. Olivia was going to wake up, and when she did, there was no telling how she would react. Would she remember everything? Would she regret what happened? Would they even be able to look each other in the eye after all these years? James couldn't answer any of those questions just yet. He walked out of the room, his mind heavy with uncertainty. As he headed down the hallway, he thought back to that night, when Olivia had walked out of his life. He had never gotten closure. And now, with her life in his hands once again, would he get a chance to heal, or would the past tear them apart for good? As the days passed, Olivia remained unconscious in the hospital, her life hanging by a thread, but her fate now rested in Dr. Carter's hands. He visited her room every day, checking her vitals, adjusting her medications, and keeping a close watch on her recovery. But each time he entered, he found himself torn between professional duty and personal emotions. He had spent so many years building walls around his heart, convinced that love was something to be avoided. Yet, seeing her here, so fragile and vulnerable, stirred something deep inside him that he had long buried. He couldn't deny it anymore. He still cared, and it hurt. It hurt more than he wanted to admit. Olivia had always been full of life. When they were together, they had shared dreams of a future, of travel, of growing old together. But that was before she had walked away, before she broke his heart and left him questioning everything about love and trust. And now, here she was, lying in a hospital bed, a shadow of the woman he once knew. Dr. Carter struggled to keep his focus. He had to remind himself that he was a doctor first. But the past had a way of creeping back in, especially when the person who hurt you was right in front of you, vulnerable and in need of help. One morning, as Dr. Carter entered her room for his usual checkup, he found Olivia's eyes fluttering open. His heart skipped a beat. He wasn't prepared for this moment. This was not just a patient waking up. This was Olivia, the woman who had once stolen his heart. Her eyes slowly focused on him, and for a brief second, she seemed confused, disoriented. And then, recognition. She saw him, and something flickered in her gaze. "James?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. The sound of her calling his name made his chest tighten. It had been years since she had spoken to him like that. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, like she was testing the waters to see if he would bite. Would he be the same doctor who had once been her lover, or was he now a stranger? He cleared his throat, trying to mask the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil he was feeling inside. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" He kept his tone professional, but his heart was racing. This was not just a medical situation anymore. This was personal. She tried to sit up, but the pain from the accident made her wince. I'm okay. What happened? How did I get here?" She looked around, her eyes scanning the sterile hospital room, trying to piece together the events that had led her to this point. James paused for a moment before answering. "You were in a car accident. You were unconscious for a few days. We were able to stabilize you, but it's going to take time for you to fully recover." He couldn't help but notice how vulnerable she looked now. The woman who had once been so strong, so sure of herself. She had left him without explanation, without warning. And now, here she was, with nothing left but the past they shared. Olivia's gaze softened as she looked up at him. "I didn't mean to hurt you, James. I never wanted to leave you that way," she said quietly, her voice filled with regret. His heart twisted, but he kept his emotions in check. "It's been a long time, Olivia. A lot has happened since then." His words were sharp, more so than he had intended, but he couldn't help it. The pain of those years had left a mark on him that was not easily erased. "You don't need to explain yourself. You're here now. That's all that matters." Olivia lowered her gaze, her eyes welling with tears. She wanted to reach out to him, to apologize for the pain she had caused, but she knew it was too late for that. She had already broken his heart once. Could she ever make it right? James turned to leave the room, his steps slow and deliberate. As much as he wanted to stay, to talk to her, he knew it wasn't the right time. He had a job to do. He had to put his feelings aside, at least for now. But as he reached the door, he heard her voice again. "James, wait," she called out. He turned back, his heart pounding. Olivia was sitting up now, her expression vulnerable and filled with uncertainty. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I've made a lot of mistakes, and leaving you was the biggest one." His gaze softened. He wanted to say something, to reassure her that everything would be okay. But all he could do was nod. "I'll be back later to check on you," he said quietly. "Get some rest." And with that, he left, the weight of the past still heavy on his shoulders. As James walked down the hallway, he felt a mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to shut the door on the past and never look back, but another part of him, the part he had tried to ignore for so long, was beginning to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way back to each other. But for now, all he could do was wait and see. Days passed, and Olivia's recovery continued at a slow but steady pace. Dr. James Carter kept his professional distance, visiting her only when necessary. Each day, he checked her progress, making sure the wounds from her accident were healing, but he avoided eye contact for too long. He had to. Every time their gazes met, it was as if the walls he had carefully built around his heart were beginning to crack. The old feelings he thought he had buried rushed back, overwhelming him with confusion. He couldn't decide if he was angry with her, or if part of him still wanted to reach out and hold her. Maybe both. Olivia, on the other hand, spent her days replaying the past in her mind. The accident had left her physically wounded, but the real scars, those emotional wounds, were deeper. As much as she regretted leaving James all those years ago, she knew that no apology could take away the pain she had caused him. She had to face the truth. She had walked away from the one person who had truly loved her. And now, here she was, dependent on him to save her life again. just as he had done all those years ago when they were together. One evening, as James sat in his office, reviewing patient files, his phone buzzed with a text from Olivia's room. It was simple. Asterisk, can we talk? Asterisk, his heart skipped a beat. He had been expecting this moment, but he wasn't ready. He glanced at the clock. It was late, and his shift was about to end. But something told him that this was a conversation he couldn't avoid any longer. With a sigh, he stood up, grabbed his coat, and headed to her room. When he entered, Olivia was sitting on the edge of the bed, her legs dangling as she stared out the window. The soft glow from the streetlights illuminated her face, and for a moment, she seemed distant, lost in her own thoughts. When she heard the door open, she turned toward him, and their eyes met. There was an awkward silence, the kind that hung in the air like an unspoken question. "James," she began, her voice tentative. "I know this is probably the last thing you want right now, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. I've spent so many years trying to run away from the mistakes I made, but running away never fixed anything. It just made everything worse." James leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, unsure of how to respond. Part of him wanted to tell her that it was too late, that she had hurt him too much. But another part of him, the part he had been suppressing for so long, wanted to hear her out. Maybe this time, there would be a way forward. Maybe they could fix things. "Olivia," he said, his voice soft but firm, "you left. You walked away without explanation. And it's been a long time since I stopped asking myself why. I built my life around the idea that I couldn't trust anyone again. I threw myself into my work, into everything that didn't matter, just so I wouldn't have to think about you. But now you're here, and I don't know what to feel anymore." Olivia's eyes glistened with tears as she spoke. "I know. I hurt you, and I will never be able to take that back. But what I can do is be honest with you now. I was scared, James. Scared of being vulnerable. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving, but I was wrong. I thought I could live without you, but I can't. I can't pretend that I don't still love you." Her words hung in the air, and for a long moment, James didn't speak. His mind was racing, caught between the desire to forgive and the fear of being hurt again. But something in Olivia's eyes told him that this was real. This wasn't just an apology, it was a chance for both of them to heal. Slowly, he walked towards her and sat down at the edge of the bed. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. "You think you can just come back into my life and everything will be okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Olivia shook her head. "No, I don't expect that. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, or to pretend that everything is fine. But I want a chance to make things right. I don't want to run anymore." James sighed deeply, his eyes softening. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "But I don't want to give up on you, either." They sat in silence, the weight of their past heavy between them. But as the minutes passed, something began to shift in the air, like the first stirrings of something new. For the first time in years, James felt a flicker of hope. Hope that maybe they could rebuild what had been broken. Maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. And in that moment, as the city lights flickered outside, they both realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about moving forward, together. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension. Olivia and James had come to terms with their past, but neither of them knew exactly how to move forward. James kept his distance, focusing on his work at the hospital, while Olivia focused on her recovery. But despite the space they gave each other, there was a subtle shift in the air whenever they were in the same room. It wasn't just the lingering tension from their past, but something else, a spark, a glimmer of hope that maybe they could rebuild what they once had. One afternoon, as James walked into Olivia's room for her regular checkup, he noticed that she was sitting by the window, looking out at the view of the city. Her expression was thoughtful, almost distant. When she saw him enter, she smiled faintly, though there was an underlying sadness in her eyes. James knew she was still struggling with the weight of their past, just as he was. They both had their scars, and those scars wouldn't heal overnight. "James," Olivia began, her voice softer than usual, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us, about what happened. And I know I can't just expect you to forgive me. I don't want to rush you, but I want to be honest with you. I still care about you. I never stopped caring." James paused, feeling his heart tighten. He had always known that Olivia still had a place in his heart, but hearing her admit it aloud was different. It felt like a weight had been lifted, but it also brought a new kind of vulnerability to the surface, one that neither of them was ready for. He took a deep breath before responding. I know you do, Olivia, and I can't deny that I still have feelings for you too. But that's the problem. We both know it's not that simple. We can't just pick up where we left off, as if nothing happened. Olivia lowered her gaze, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the blanket on her bed. I know, she whispered, and I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm not asking you to pretend that everything is okay. But I want to try. I want to see if we can rebuild what we had, even if it's not exactly the same. I'm willing to take that chance if you are. James looked at her for a long moment, his heart torn between the past and the present. He had been hurt so deeply by her departure, and part of him was still afraid of being hurt again. But the truth was, he couldn't just walk away from her. Not when he knew that, deep down, they still had something worth fighting for. It's going to be hard, Olivia, he said softly. We've both changed, and there's a lot we need to work through. But if you're willing to try, then maybe I can be too. Olivia's face lit up with a small smile, and for the first time since the accident, James felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and there was still so much uncertainty ahead. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was finally moving forward, not alone, but with her by his side. Over the next few weeks, things between them slowly began to change. Olivia's recovery progressed, and she became more active, more engaged in the world around her. James, too, found himself loosening the walls he had built up over the years. They began talking more, not just about the past, but about their hopes for the future. They went on small outings together, spending time in places that reminded them of the love they had once shared. But even as they grew closer, there was a part of James that couldn't let go of the fear of being hurt again, the fear of making the wrong choice. He kept reminding himself that they had a long way to go before they could truly heal from the wounds of their past. One evening, as they sat together in the hospital's garden, watching the sunset, Olivia reached out and took his hand. James looked at her, surprised by the simple gesture. It wasn't a grand romantic move, but something in the way she held his hand felt genuine, steady, and real. I know we have a long way to go, she said quietly, but I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere this time. James squeezed her hand, feeling a warmth spread through him. It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect, but it was a promise that they would face whatever came next together. And for the first time in a long while, he believed it. Maybe they couldn't erase the past, but they could build something new, something real. As the sun dipped below the horizon, James found himself looking at Olivia in a way he hadn't in years, with hope. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he was ready to face it. Weeks passed, and things between Olivia and James began to settle into a new rhythm. They still had their moments of tension, of course. Old wounds didn't heal overnight. But with every passing day, they found themselves getting a little closer, talking more, and rebuilding the trust that had been broken so many years ago. For Olivia, every small step forward was a victory, a reminder that she wasn't as lost as she once felt. For James, it was a challenge, but one he was beginning to embrace. He had never expected to be here, standing on the edge of something new with the woman who had once torn his heart apart. But here he was, and surprisingly, he didn't feel as terrified as he once did. One evening, as they sat together in his office, James looked across the desk at Olivia, his eyes searching her face for signs of the woman he had once known. She was different now, more vulnerable, yes, but also stronger in ways he hadn't expected. She had come through the hardest part of her recovery, both physically and emotionally, and it showed in her confidence, in the way she spoke about her future. But still, there was a wall between them, a boundary neither of them had quite crossed yet. They hadn't spoken about the past in any real way, and James wasn't sure if he was ready to dive into that painful territory just yet. James, we need to talk, Olivia said softly, breaking the silence between them. Her tone was serious, but not forceful. She had always been good at reading him, at knowing when something was on his mind, even when he tried to hide it. James met her gaze and nodded. I know. I've been thinking the same thing. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. I just didn't want to rush it. I don't want to push you into something you're not ready for. Olivia smiled faintly, her eyes filled with understanding. You don't have to worry about that. I know it's going to take time. But I also know that we can't keep avoiding the hard stuff. We can't move forward until we face everything that's happened between us. James's heart ached at her words, but he knew she was right. They couldn't keep pretending that the past didn't matter, not if they were going to have any chance of rebuilding what they once had. I'm scared, Olivia, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that we won't be able to fix this, that the damage is too deep. Olivia reached across the desk, her hand gently resting on top of his. I'm scared too, James. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. We both made mistakes. I walked away from you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I want to make it right. I want to try again. I want us to have a future together. James's chest tightened at the sincerity in her voice. He had spent so many years building walls to protect himself from the hurt she had caused. But now, standing before him, was a woman who was ready to face the truth of their past, and who was asking him to do the same. For the first time, he realized that maybe the fear wasn't about being hurt again. Maybe the fear was about being vulnerable, about giving his heart away to someone who had once broken it. He looked down at her hand, still resting on his. Slowly, he covered it with his own. I want that too, Olivia. I want us to have a future. But I need to know that you're really here. That you're not going to leave me again when things get tough. Her eyes softened, and she nodded. I'm not going anywhere this time, James. I promise. The air between them shifted, a quiet understanding settling over them. For the first time in what felt like forever, James allowed himself to believe in something he had long since given up on. Hope. Maybe they couldn't undo the past, but they had the chance to build something new. And for the first time, that idea didn't scare him. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and James spent more time together, slowly rebuilding the foundation of their relationship. They talked about their fears, their dreams, and the mistakes they had made. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of discomfort, but each conversation brought them closer. They found new ways to connect, ways that didn't involve the pain of their past, but instead focused on what lay ahead. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of James's apartment, watching the city lights flicker below them, James turned to Olivia with a smile. I never thought we'd be here, he said softly, his voice filled with quiet awe. After everything that happened, I never thought we'd get another chance. Olivia squeezed his hand, her gaze steady and full of love. I know, but here we are. And for the first time, I really believe that this is where we're meant to be. James nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that as long as they were together, they could face whatever came their way. The weeks that followed felt like a new beginning for both Olivia and James. They had spent so much time rebuilding their relationship, focusing on the present instead of dwelling on the past. Their connection deepened with every conversation, and slowly, they started to find their way back to each other. Olivia's recovery was progressing well, both physically and emotionally, and James had begun to let down his guard, something he hadn't done in years. But even with all this progress, they both knew that the hardest part was yet to come. It was one thing to rebuild their connection, but it was another to trust again, to open up fully and face the fears that had held them both captive for so long. One evening, as they walked through the park, their hands brushing occasionally, Olivia turned to James, her expression serious. James, she started, her voice quiet. There's something I need to tell you. James stopped walking and looked at her, his heart skipping a beat. He had grown so accustomed to the comfort of their routine that he hadn't expected anything to shake them. But there was something in her eyes, something that told him this wasn't just a casual conversation. What's on your mind? He asked softly, sensing the weight of her words. Olivia took a deep breath before continuing. I've been thinking about everything, about us, about the future. And I realized that while we've come so far, there's still a part of me that's afraid. Afraid of fully trusting again. Afraid of losing you once more. James reached for her hand, his thumb gently brushing over her skin. Olivia, I understand, he said, his voice filled with empathy. I've been holding back too. I'm scared too. But we can't keep living in fear. We've come this far together, and I believe we can go even further. But we have to trust each other. We have to let go of the past if we want to move forward. She looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. What if we try and it doesn't work? What if we fall apart again? James smiled softly, squeezing her hand reassuringly. We can't predict the future, Olivia. All we have is right now. And right now, I want to be with you. I want to see where this can go. together. Olivia felt a warmth spread through her chest as she looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make it work. She had always feared the unknown, but now, with James by her side, the unknown didn't seem as daunting. She was willing to take the risk. She was willing to trust him again. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let's do this. Let's try." James's heart lifted at her words. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. But in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. He was ready to fight for them, ready to rebuild what they had, piece by piece. Over the next few months, Olivia and James continued to grow closer, learning how to navigate their new relationship. They spent weekends exploring the city, cooking meals together, and simply enjoying each other's company. The emotional walls between them slowly crumbled, replaced by a sense of comfort and trust that had once seemed impossible. There were still challenges, of course. Old insecurities crept in from time to time, and they had their share of disagreements. But each time they faced a challenge, they learned how to communicate, how to listen, and how to support each other. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. And with every passing day, they both grew more confident in the fact that they had a future together. One night, as they sat on the couch, watching a movie and laughing over silly jokes, James turned to Olivia, his heart full of affection. "You know, I never thought I'd get to this point," he said, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. "I never thought we'd be here, together, after everything that's happened." Olivia smiled, her hand resting gently on his. "Neither did I," she replied. "But I'm glad we are. And I'm glad it's with you." James leaned in, his lips brushing against her forehead in a tender kiss. "Me too," he murmured. As they sat there in the quiet of the evening, surrounded by the warmth of each other's presence, both Olivia and James knew that their journey wasn't over. There would still be ups and downs, moments of doubt, and fears to face. But they also knew that they had something worth fighting for, a love that had been tested by time, by mistakes, and by the past. And in that moment, with the promise of a future together, they were ready to face whatever came next. As the weeks went by, Olivia and James settled into a comfortable routine. Their bond had strengthened, and they found themselves slipping into old habits, but with a new sense of understanding and mutual respect. Olivia was back at work part-time, eager to resume her life and put the past behind her, while James continued his demanding role at the hospital. They spent evenings together, cooking dinner, talking about everything and nothing, and slowly, the fear of the past no longer dominated their thoughts. They had built something new, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like it could last. But even with all the progress they had made, there were still moments when the shadows of the past loomed over them. James had tried to push away the lingering doubt that had haunted him for so long, the fear that their fragile relationship might shatter once again. Olivia, too, carried her own anxieties, especially about whether she had truly earned back his trust. She knew she had hurt him deeply, and although he said he was ready to move on, part of her wondered if he had truly forgiven her. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of James's apartment, the city lights sparkling below them, Olivia turned to him with a serious expression. "James," she began, her voice quiet but filled with emotion, "I need to ask you something." James raised an eyebrow, sensing the weight in her tone. "Of course," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. Olivia took a deep breath, her fingers nervously twisting a strand of her hair. "Do you really forgive me? I mean, I know we've come a long way, and I know you say we can move forward, but I need to hear it from you. Do you really trust me again?" James was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the skyline as he thought about her question. He had been avoiding this very conversation, unsure of how to answer, afraid that his own feelings were not as clear as he wanted them to be. Slowly, he turned to face her, his eyes softening. "I want to forgive you, Olivia," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I really do. But trust is something that takes time. It's not something that can be fixed with a few words. I'm still learning to trust again, and that's not just about you. It's about me too." Olivia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but also a pang of sadness. She knew what he meant. Trust couldn't be rebuilt in an instant. It was something they both had to work on, together. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I just need you to know that I'm here for you. I'm not going anywhere. James reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing gently across her skin. I know, and that means more to me than you can imagine. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their conversation lingering between them. But as the night wore on, the tension between them slowly faded. They didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, they both felt a sense of peace. They were on the right path, even if it wasn't perfect. The next few days passed by in a blur of small, quiet moments. They were learning how to live with each other again, to embrace the good and the bad. There were still bumps in the road, old arguments, misunderstandings, and fears, but they were learning how to navigate them with patience and compassion. One afternoon, as they walked through the park hand in hand, James stopped and turned to Olivia. I've been thinking, he said, his tone thoughtful. We've been through a lot, and I know there's still a long way to go, but I don't want to wait any longer. Olivia looked at him, confused. What do you mean? She asked. James smiled softly, his eyes filled with warmth. I mean, I don't want to wait to make things official. I want you in my life, Olivia. Not just for now, but for always. He dropped to one knee, pulling out a small box. Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in surprise as she realized what he was doing. Will you marry me? He asked, his voice filled with hope and sincerity. Olivia's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she couldn't find the words. Her mind raced, filled with a mixture of joy, fear, and disbelief. But as she looked at him, she realized that this was the moment. This was the future they had worked for, the love they had rebuilt. Slowly, she nodded, her voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I will marry you, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. James stood, pulling her into his arms, and they embraced, the weight of their past melting away in that single, perfect moment. It wasn't a perfect story, and it wouldn't be a perfect future. But it was theirs, and that was enough. The days after, their engagement were filled with a mix of excitement and anticipation. Olivia and James spent hours planning the future, talking about wedding details, and dreaming about what life would look like together. They were both eager to put the past behind them, but they knew that their journey was far from over. Trust was still something they had to nurture, and healing was a continuous process. Yet, in every moment they shared, they grew stronger together, each step forward solidifying the foundation of their renewed relationship. One evening, after a long day at work, James came home to find Olivia in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The sight of her, so focused and content, brought a sense of calm he hadn't realized he needed. He walked over to her, wrapped his arms around her from behind, and kissed her gently on the neck. She smiled at the familiar gesture, leaning back into him. How was your day? She asked, turning to face him. James sighed and smiled, the weight of the world lifting from his shoulders. It was busy, but it's always better when I get to come home to you, he said softly. Olivia's eyes softened, her heart swelling with love. She had never imagined that after everything, they would end up here, together, stronger than before. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers lightly grazing his jaw. I'm glad we're here, she whispered. We've been through so much, but we're finally building something real. James nodded, his hand resting on hers. I know, and I don't ever want to take this for granted. I want to make it work, Olivia. For both of us. She smiled, a little tear slipping down her cheek. I think we already are. As they sat down to eat, the conversation turned to their plans for the future. They talked about moving in together, about traveling, and the possibility of starting a family one day. There was no rush, but they both knew they were on the same page. Their dreams, once separate, had now merged into a shared vision. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. They chose a small venue with a beautiful view of the city, and their families, though initially hesitant, were beginning to come around. The relationship between Olivia and James was still a work in progress, but every challenge they faced together only made them stronger. One afternoon, while going through wedding invitations, Olivia received a call from her mother. It had been a while since they had spoken, and Olivia's heart raced with anticipation. She hadn't shared much with her family about her relationship with James, especially the difficult parts. But now, it felt like the right time. Mom, Olivia said, answering the phone. Her voice was shaky with nerves. Olivia, how are you? I've been meaning to call you. I heard about the engagement, and I wanted to say, I'm happy for you. I know things weren't always easy between you two, but I see that you've worked hard to get here. You deserve this." Her mother's voice was warm, sincere. Olivia's eyes welled up with tears. "Thank you, Mom. That means more than you know." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about our family, about what I've been through. And I want you to be a part of this. I want you to be there with us at the wedding." Her mother's voice softened, and for the first time in years, Olivia felt a sense of peace. "I'd be honored, Olivia. I'm proud of you. And I'm proud of you and James. You've come a long way." As Olivia hung up the phone, she looked at James, who had been watching her quietly. "That was my mom," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "She's coming to the wedding. She's really coming." James reached out and took her hand, his heart swelling with pride for the woman in front of him. "I'm so proud of you, Olivia. I knew you could do it." They shared a quiet moment, the weight of their past slowly fading away. They were creating something new together, something beautiful. And for the first time in a long time, they both believed that the future was bright. As the wedding day approached, there was still a nervous excitement in the air. But this time, it was different. They were ready to start the next chapter of their lives, hand in hand, knowing that they had overcome the hardest part together. The day of the wedding arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. Olivia and James had spent the past few months preparing for this moment, and now, as they stood in front of their closest friends and family, it felt as though everything had finally come full circle. Olivia stood in the quiet of the dressing room, her heart racing with excitement, while James waited just outside, feeling the same nervous energy. Neither of them could quite believe that they had made it this far. The journey had been long, filled with pain, regret, and heartache, but they had come through it all, together. And now, this was their moment. This was the beginning of their forever. As Olivia walked down the aisle, the world seemed to disappear. The soft music, the gentle whispers of their guests, everything faded into the background as she locked eyes with James. He was standing at the altar, his face filled with a mix of awe and love. In that moment, Olivia felt a deep, unshakable connection to him. This was the man who had stood by her through the darkest of times, who had shown her the kind of love she never thought was possible. And now, they were standing here, about to take the biggest step of their lives. "You look beautiful," James whispered as she reached his side, his voice thick with emotion. Olivia smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "So do you," she whispered back. "This moment is everything I've ever wanted." The ceremony was intimate, filled with moments of laughter, love, and quiet reflection. They exchanged vows that came straight from their hearts, promises to love and cherish one another, to face every challenge together, and to never let go of what they had built. There was no mention of the past, no need to dwell on the mistakes they had made. Instead, they focused on the future, the life they were about to create, side by side. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Olivia felt a rush of joy that overwhelmed her. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was a new beginning. She took James's hand, feeling the weight of the promise they had just made. They were now bound together not just by love, but by the commitment to make their relationship work, no matter what. They had both learned the hard way that love wasn't always easy, but it was always worth fighting for. Later, as they stood together under the twinkling lights of their reception, surrounded by friends and family, James pulled Olivia close, his arms wrapped around her waist. "We made it," he whispered, his lips brushing against her ear. Olivia looked up at him, her heart full. "We did," she replied softly. "I never thought we would, but here we are. And it feels like everything is finally falling into place." They danced together, lost in the moment, as the world around them seemed to slow down. There was no fear, no doubt, just the overwhelming certainty that they had made the right choice. They had chosen each other, and they would continue choosing each other every single day. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew they would face them together. And that was enough. As the night came to a close, James held Olivia close, his heart swelling with love and pride. "You know," he said, his voice full of affection, "I used to think I had it all figured out. But then you came into my life, and you showed me that love is about more than just having everything. It's about finding someone who makes everything worth it." Olivia smiled, resting her head against his chest. And you showed me that sometimes the hardest things in life can lead to the most beautiful moments. I'm so glad I didn't give up on us. James kissed the top of her head, his heart full of gratitude. I'm glad too, because with you, I found everything I've ever needed. As they walked out into the cool night, hand in hand, they knew that their love story was just beginning. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. They had overcome their past, and now they had a future to look forward to, together.